The notification sound pierced through Westbrook Academy's library at exactly 3:47 p.m., shattering the sacred silence that had protected studying students for decades. Within seconds, 847 phones buzzed simultaneously, screens lighting up with the same image that would destroy 4 lives before dinner. Xiomara Delacroix stood half-dressed in a bathroom stall, unaware of the camera lens capturing her vulnerability from above, her privacy violated in the most calculated way possible. But here's what nobody understood in those first chaotic moments as gasps echoed through ancient bookshelves and fingers frantically shared the humiliating photo across every social platform imaginable. Xiomara wasn't a victim caught off guard. She was a hunter who had baited her trap for 7 months, and the photograph spreading like wildfire through cyberspace was exactly what she needed to trigger the most devastating revenge Westbrook Academy would ever witness. By 3:48 p.m., while her classmates whispered and pointed, Xiomara's fingers danced across her laptop keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist performing their masterpiece. By 4:15 p.m., Caden Blackwood's entire digital existence would evaporate into nothing. And by midnight, 3 prominent families would be filing restraining orders against their own sons, desperately trying to salvage what remained of their shattered reputations. The library's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Xiomara's face as she continued typing, unbothered by the pointing fingers and cruel laughter surrounding her. If you're already feeling that knot in your stomach, wondering what these boys had coming, hit that like button and subscribe to see how this unfolds. And hey, if stories about underdogs delivering ultimate justice resonate with you, the thanks button below helps me bring more of these powerful revelations to light. Now let me take you back 7 months to understand how a transfer student everyone dismissed as weak orchestrated the complete annihilation of Westbrook's most feared bullies. 7 months earlier, January's bitter cold had wrapped Westbrook Academy in sheets of ice when Xiomara first walked through those intimidating oak doors. The scholarship student from nowhere, wearing thrift store clothes that practically screamed poverty to the designer-clad elite who ruled these hallways. Her ancient laptop, held together with duct tape and determination, marked her as an easy target before she even spoke her first word. The library became her sanctuary, or so everyone believed. Every day at precisely 2:30 p.m., she claimed the same corner table, surrounded by towering shelves that blocked most sightlines, but left her perfectly positioned to observe everything happening in the vast study space. Students dismissed her presence the way they dismissed furniture, never realizing those downcast eyes were memorizing their every pattern, cataloging their weaknesses, documenting their crimes. Caden Blackwood noticed her on day 3 because predators always recognize potential prey. 6 feet 2 inches of inherited arrogance wrapped in a lacrosse team jacket, he moved through Westbrook's halls like he owned them, which technically his family almost did after 3 generations of donations. His crew followed with practiced formation, each member serving a specific purpose in their carefully orchestrated reign of terror. Jackson Rivers handled the physical intimidation, his wrestler's build and dead eyes making even teachers step aside when he approached. Dmitry Volkov managed their digital presence, his father's tech company connections providing access to tools that should have been illegal for teenagers to possess. And then there was Ethan Nakamura, whose artistic talents had been weaponized into creating devastating memes and edited photos that destroyed reputations overnight. Their first interaction unfolded exactly as Xiomara had predicted after observing their patterns for 72 hours. Caden approached her table. With that particular swagger, Bullies perfect, when they've identified someone who won't fight back. His shadow falling across her economics textbook, like a storm cloud, promising destruction. "Interesting choice of study spot," he said, his voice carrying that specific frequency of menace wrapped in false friendliness. "Most scholarship kids know better than to claim territory in the main library." Xiomara's fingers paused on her keyboard for exactly 2 seconds, a calculated hesitation that suggested fear without overplaying the performance. I didn't realize seats were assigned. The librarian said students could sit anywhere. The laugh that rippled through Caden's crew held no humor, only the anticipation of entertainment at someone else's expense. Dmitri already had his phone out, ready to document whatever humiliation would follow, because everything became content in their twisted social media empire. Technically true, Caden continued, picking up her economics textbook and flipping through it with deliberate carelessness. But there's what's technically allowed, and then there's understanding the social contract of a place like Westbrook. You understand contracts, don't you? Being a scholarship student and all? The insult landed exactly where he'd aimed it, reminding everyone within earshot that Xiomara didn't belong in their world of trust funds and legacy admissions. She let her shoulders slump slightly, perfecting the posture of someone learning their place in a hostile ecosystem. But her fingers found their position on the keyboard again, typing something that made the lights flicker for just a moment, though nobody connected the two events. "I'll find somewhere else to study tomorrow," she murmured, gathering her belongings with the rushed movements of retreat that Bullies found so satisfying to witness. "Smart girl," Jackson added, cracking his knuckles in that cliché intimidation move that somehow still worked on most students. "We'd hate for your scholarship to become complicated by disciplinary issues." The threat hung in the air, like a poisonous cloud, as Xiomara packed her things. But what Caden's crew couldn't see was the small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, hidden by the curtain of dark hair she let fall across her face. They'd taken the bait exactly as she'd anticipated, establishing the dynamic that would make her revenge so much sweeter when it finally arrived. Days turned into weeks as Xiomara perfected her role as Westbrook's newest victim. She ate alone in the cafeteria's furthest corner, walked hallways with her head down, submitted assignments electronically to avoid classroom confrontations. Teachers noticed but didn't intervene because Caden Blackwood's family had donated the new science wing, and institutional memory ran deep when millions of dollars were involved. But every moment of apparent submission served a larger purpose. Her old laptop, which everyone mocked for its obsolete appearance, contained military-grade encryption software hidden beneath its battered exterior. Every keystroke captured data from the school's network. Every login analyzed patterns. Every interaction documented with forensic precision. The first breadcrumb came 3 weeks into the semester when Xiomara deliberately left a flash drive in the computer lab. Its neon pink case, impossible to miss against the sterile white desks. Ethan found it within minutes because she'd timed her exit to coincide with his regular visit to edit photos for the yearbook, a position he'd weaponized into accessing unflattering images of anyone who crossed their crew. "Check this out," Ethan called to Dmitri, who was coding something that probably violated several federal laws regarding unauthorized access to private systems. Scholarship Girl dropped her drive. The files inside appeared to be diary entries, poorly password protected, with password 123 that even amateur hackers would find insulting. But Xiomara had crafted each entry with psychological precision, mixing genuine details with fabricated vulnerabilities designed to make her seem like the perfect victim for their particular brand of cruelty. Entry after entry detailed her supposed fears, her family's fictional financial struggles, her desperate need to maintain her scholarship by avoiding any disciplinary actions. She'd even included fake photos of a rundown apartment she'd never lived in, younger siblings who didn't exist, and medical bills for a mother who was actually a highly paid software engineer living comfortably in Seattle. "This is gold," Dmitri breathed, scrolling through the files with the excitement of someone who'd found buried treasure. "She's basically handed us everything we need to completely destroy her if she steps out of line." Caden examined the screen over his friend's shoulder, his smile growing wider with each revealed secret. "Transfer the files to our private server. This kind of leverage is too valuable to keep on a drive someone might steal." They copied everything, never questioning why someone would password protect such sensitive information with such an obvious code, never wondering why the diary entries seemed almost too perfectly aligned with their interests. Predators rarely questioned gifts that made hunting easier, and Xiomara had counted on their arrogance blinding them, to the trap slowly closing around them. February brought Valentine's Day, and with it an escalation in harassment that Xiomara documented with hidden cameras she'd placed throughout the school during janitorial shifts. She'd gotten the job through the work-study program, the perfect cover for accessing areas students couldn't normally enter, while installing surveillance equipment that would eventually provide evidence for federal prosecutors. The roses appeared in her locker on February 14th, but they weren't a romantic gesture. Each stem had been painted black, the petals carefully coated in something that smelled like decay, and the card attached contained a message cut from magazine letters like a serial killer's manifesto. Nobody loves charity cases. Give up and go home. She carried the roses through the hallway, letting everyone see her humiliation, letting them document her supposed breakdown when she threw them in the trash with shaking hands. But those same hands had carefully preserved one petal in an evidence bag, the chemical composition of whatever they'd used traceable to a specific art supply store where Ethan had made purchases on his father's credit card. The pattern continued through March and April, each incident carefully orchestrated to seem random while building toward something larger. Food spilled on her accidentally in the cafeteria, homework stolen from her locker and submitted under someone else's name. Rumors spread through anonymous social media accounts about her supposed romantic desperation and family dysfunction. Xiomara endured it all with a patience that came from knowing every moment of suffering was being recorded, cataloged, and prepared for presentation in a courtroom that would destroy her tormentors more thoroughly than any physical confrontation ever could. She played her role perfectly, the scholarship student slowly breaking under pressure, never letting them see the hunter beneath the victim's mask. May arrived with standardized testing that consumed the school's attention, providing perfect cover for Xiomara to accelerate her digital infiltration. She'd gained access to Dimitri's coding projects by simply being present when he typed passwords, her peripheral vision and memory trained to capture keystrokes without appearing to watch. His supposed security measures fell apart when confronted with someone who understood that the weakest point in any system was human arrogance. The private server, where they stored their trophy collection, revealed horrors that made even Xiomara's stomach turn. Hundreds of photos of female students, many taken without consent in locker rooms and bathrooms, using cameras hidden in vents and ceiling tiles. Videos of students in compromising positions at parties, some clearly unconscious and unable to consent to being filmed. Years of systematic predation documented with the same pride serial killers took in keeping souvenirs. But mixed among the evidence of their crimes were their own communications. Group chats where they discussed drugging techniques, rated girls on their vulnerability, planned assaults with the casual efficiency of corporate meetings. They documented their own guilt so thoroughly that prosecutors would later call it the most self-incriminating evidence they'd ever seen presented in a federal case. Xiomara copied everything to multiple secure servers, including one maintained by a contact she'd made through channels that remained deliberately vague, even in her own mind. The Athena Collective had reached out to her 6 months before she'd transferred to Westbrook, their reputation preceding them through whispered stories on survivor forums and encrypted message boards where victims sought justice outside traditional systems that had failed them. June brought finals, and with them a strange tension that permeated Westbrook's halls like electricity before a storm. Caden's crew had grown bored with their usual targets, seeking something more dramatic to cap off their senior year before they dispersed to Ivy League schools that would accept them despite disciplinary records scrubbed clean by family lawyers and strategic donations. The planning sessions happened in Dimitri's car, a Tesla with supposedly sophisticated anti-surveillance technology that couldn't detect the microscopic transmitter Xiomara had placed during a staged collision in the parking lot. Their voices came through crystal clear as they discussed their masterpiece, the ultimate humiliation that would cement their legacy at Westbrook, while destroying someone so thoroughly they'd never recover. Bathroom photos are classic for a reason. Ethan argued, sketching something on his tablet that transmitted directly to Shiomara's secured files. But we need an angle that hasn't been done before, something that will go viral beyond just the school. What about during the Academic Excellence Assembly? Jackson suggested. Everyone will have their phones out already, and she always uses that second-floor bathroom during the break because the main ones are too crowded. Dimitri's fingers flew across his phone screen, pulling up blueprint layouts of the school that definitely shouldn't have been accessible to students. There's a maintenance access panel above that stall. I can get in there the night before, install the camera, and control everything remotely. Too risky, Caden decided after considering the proposal. We need something that looks more organic, less planned. If this traces back to us, even our families won't be able to make it disappear. The solution came from an unexpected source when Principal Morrison unknowingly provided the perfect opportunity. The library would undergo network maintenance on September 15th, requiring all students to leave their devices in lockers while using temporary computer stations that couldn't access the internet. It created a window where surveillance would be minimal and alibis would be ironclad. Shiomara listened to them refine their plan through summer break, their excitement building as September approached. They had no idea she'd already prepared countermeasures for every scenario they discussed, including the one they'd finally chosen. The maintenance panel Dimitri had identified was already equipped with her own cameras, positioned to capture anyone who tried to use that vantage point for invasion of privacy. August melted into September with unprecedented heat that made the old building's air conditioning surrender before noon each day. Students grew sluggish and irritable, creating the perfect emotional atmosphere for what would unfold. Shiomara had spent the summer adding final touches to her trap, including establishing connections with 3 local law firms that specialized in cases involving minors and digital crimes. September 15th arrived like Christmas morning for Caden's crew, their anticipation electric as they prepared for what they believed would be their greatest achievement. The library maintenance provided perfect cover as students cycled through computer stations, forced to leave phones in lockers that Dimitri had already hacked to ensure their devices would show them in completely different locations when investigators eventually checked. Shiomara entered the library at 3:30 p.m., her presence unremarkable after months of establishing this pattern. She worked at her assigned station for exactly 12 minutes, solving calculus problems with mechanical precision, while her internal clock counted down to the moment she'd rehearsed hundreds of times in her mind. At 3:42 p.m., she excused herself for the bathroom, taking the route she'd used every Tuesday and Thursday for the entire previous semester. The second-floor bathroom was empty as expected, the maintenance work having disrupted normal traffic patterns in ways she'd carefully calculated. She entered the third stall, the one with the broken lock she'd ensured would remain unfixed by repeatedly filing work orders that mysteriously disappeared from the system. Above her, hidden in the maintenance panel, Dimitri held his breath while positioning his phone's camera through the gap he'd created the night before. His hands shook slightly with excitement as he framed the shot, waiting for the perfect moment when she'd be most vulnerable, most exposed, most humiliated. What he couldn't see from his position was Shiomara's face reflected in the mirror she'd installed at a precise angle weeks earlier. Couldn't see the small smile playing across her lips as she heard his breathing change when she began removing her cardigan. Her fingers moved with deliberate slowness, giving him time to think he was capturing exactly what he'd planned while her own cameras recorded every crime he was committing. The shutter sound was almost silent, but Shiomara heard it clearly, just as she heard the quick intake of breath that followed when Dimitri realized he'd forgotten to mute his phone completely. She continued undressing just enough to ensure the photo would be damaging if distributed, but not enough to constitute anything more serious than harassment charges for him. The balance had to be perfect for what would come next. At 3:45 p.m., Dimitri sent the image to their group chat with a message that would later be read aloud in federal court. Package delivered. Operation Yearbook is complete. Within seconds, Caden had uploaded it to the anonymous confession page he thought was untraceable, adding a caption that mixed slut-shaming with classist insults designed to ensure maximum humiliation. Jackson posted it to 3 different social media platforms using burner accounts they'd created months earlier. Ethan was already working on edited versions, adding cruel captions and manipulating the image in ways that would haunt him during his eventual therapy sessions in federal prison. At 3:47 p.m., the notification sound shattered the library's silence as 847 phones received the image simultaneously. The chaos that followed unfolded exactly as Xiomara had predicted, down to which students would gasp, which would laugh, and which would immediately start sharing the image without considering the consequences of distributing what was essentially revenge porn involving a minor. But while the student body reacted with the predictable mixture of shock and cruelty, something else was happening in the digital realm that none of them could see. The image contained hidden metadata that Xiomara had embedded weeks earlier when she'd infiltrated Dimitri's phone, code that activated the moment the photo was shared. It worked like a digital virus, but instead of destroying data, it collected it, tracing every share, every view, every comment back to its source with forensic precision that would make FBI analysts weep with joy. At 3:48 p.m., as whispers and laughter filled the library, Xiomara returned to her computer station and opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with the fluid grace of someone who'd been coding since childhood. Someone whose mother had actually taught her digital warfare long before mean girls and stupid boys became her targets. The first attack was surgical, aimed directly at Caden's financial existence. His trust fund, that golden parachute that had protected him from consequences his entire life, began hemorrhaging money through transactions he appeared to be authorizing himself. Every charity focused on helping sexual assault survivors received donations in his name, complete with messages admitting his crimes and begging for forgiveness he'd never actually sought. The beauty of the attack lay in its legitimacy. Every transaction followed proper protocols, used his actual authorization codes, and came from IP addresses traced directly to his devices. When investigators later tried to prove the transfers were fraudulent, they found only evidence that Caden had experienced a crisis of conscience and decided to redistribute his wealth to those he'd hurt. The legal framework of irrevocable charitable donations meant the money could never be recovered. By 3:52 p.m., Jackson's world began collapsing through a different vector. Every video he'd recorded of unconscious girls at parties began uploading to his social media accounts, but not to the public timeline. Instead, they posted directly to his family's feeds, tagged with relatives spanning 3 generations. His grandmother, the federal judge who'd protected him from previous accusations, received a particularly comprehensive package that included audio of Jackson laughing about drugging her favorite intern at last year's Christmas party. The uploads appeared so authentic that even cybersecurity experts would later struggle to explain how someone could fake such detailed digital fingerprints. Every post came from Jackson's verified devices, used his biometric data, and followed his typical posting pattern so closely that his own parents didn't initially question their authenticity. Meanwhile, Ethan discovered that artistic talent meant nothing when every college admissions office simultaneously received portfolios of his work, but not the pieces he'd submitted. Instead, they got the collection he'd hidden on encrypted drives, the manipulated photos of female students turned into degrading memes, the deepfakes he'd created of teachers in compromising positions, the entire catalog of cruelty he'd produced over 4 years of unchecked predation. The timestamps proved he'd created these during school hours, often in the same computer labs where he was supposed to be working on legitimate projects. MIT's response came fastest, a terse email stating he would be permanently banned from their campus and any affiliated programs. Other schools followed within minutes, their rejection letters citing moral turpitude clauses that had seemed like archaic formalities until that moment. At 3:57 p.m., as the full scope of the disaster began revealing itself, Dimitri experienced something even more devastating than financial or academic destruction: Every line of code he'd ever written began publishing itself to public repositories, including the backdoors he'd installed in his father's company's software, the keyloggers he'd used to steal passwords, and most damning of all, the detailed comments he'd included explaining exactly how he planned to use each tool to hurt specific individuals. His father's company's stock price would drop 40% within hours, as investors realized their security infrastructure had been compromised by the CEO's own son. The Securities and Exchange Commission would open an investigation before markets closed, and 3 major clients would terminate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dmitry had always prided himself on being the smartest person in any room, but he'd never considered that someone smarter might be watching from the shadows. At 4:03 p.m., something extraordinary began happening across every screen in Westbrook Academy. A live stream appeared on the school's official website, impossible to shut down despite frantic efforts from IT administrators who suddenly found themselves locked out of their own systems. The feed showed a single figure in shadow, but the voice that emerged was unmistakably that of Ethan Nakamura's younger brother, speaking with the broken cadence of someone finally releasing years of suppressed trauma. "My name is Ryan Nakamura," the voice began, each word heavy with the weight of truth being spoken for the first time. "And I need to tell you what my brother and his friends did to my girlfriend before she took her own life last summer." The confession that followed would later be submitted as evidence in 3 separate criminal trials, but in that moment it served as the catalyst for complete systemic collapse. Ryan detailed parties where drinks were spiked, photographs taken of unconscious victims, and a scoring system that turned sexual assault into sport. He had dates, times, locations, and most devastating of all, he had recordings of his brother bragging about each conquest. Xiomara continued typing as chaos erupted around her, students frantically checking their phones to find their own secrets being exposed. Not everyone, just those who had participated in or enabled the systematic abuse that had plagued Westbrook for years. The selectivity of the attacks made them more terrifying, proving that whoever was behind this knew everything about everyone and was choosing their targets with deliberate precision. By 4:15 p.m., Caden Blackwood stood frozen in the library's main hall, watching his entire world evaporate through a screen he couldn't control. His trust fund transfers had exceeded $3 million, every cent directed to organizations his family had spent generations opposing. His father was already calling, the senator's voice carrying through the phone with volcanic fury that promised consequences Caden had never faced before. But worse than financial ruin was the email that arrived from Harvard at 4:18 p.m., copying his parents and the entire school board. His early admission had been revoked, not just for the current application cycle, but permanently. The detailed explanation cited evidence of criminal behavior that violated their code of conduct in ways that no amount of family influence could overcome. Watching all of this unfold from that library corner where she'd endured months of torment, you have to wonder, would you have waited 7 long months for revenge like Xiomara did? Or would you have struck back immediately? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'm genuinely curious whether patience or instant karma is your style when justice needs to be served. The sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of school security, but they seemed confused about who to apprehend. The victim in the photograph was calmly working at her computer, while her attackers were having very public breakdowns throughout the building. Principal Morrison appeared, his face flushed with the particular shade of red that suggested his blood pressure medication wasn't quite enough for this situation. "Everyone remain calm," he announced, though his voice cracked on the last word. "We're investigating the situation and cyber attacks against our students. The police have been notified." Xiomara finally looked up from her screen, making eye contact with Morrison for the first time since she'd arrived at Westbrook. Something in her gaze made him step backward involuntarily, a prey response to a predator he'd failed to recognize until too late. She closed her laptop with deliberate slowness, standing with the fluid grace of someone who'd been trained in movement since childhood. "Principal Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent library, I believe you'll want to check your email. The FBI has some questions about your handling of sexual assault complaints over the past 6 years. The principal's phone buzzed before he could respond, and the color drained from his face as he read whatever had just arrived. Around them, more phones were lighting up with notifications as parents received comprehensive packages documenting their children's crimes or victimization, carefully sorted to ensure maximum impact. Caden finally found his voice, charging toward Shiomara with the kind of rage that had always gotten him what he wanted before. "You did this! You destroyed everything! I'll kill you!" But his forward momentum stopped abruptly. When Shiomara shifted her stance slightly, something in her posture suggesting capabilities that none of them had imagined the scholarship girl might possess. Jackson grabbed Caden's arm, holding him back with uncharacteristic wisdom, born from recognizing a fight they couldn't win. "Who are you?" Dmitri asked, his voice hollow with the understanding that his entire digital empire had been conquered by someone he'd dismissed as technically incompetent. No freshman could do this. No normal person could even access those systems. Shiomara smiled for the first time since the photo had been distributed, and several students stepped backward from the predatory satisfaction in that expression. "You're right. I'm not a normal freshman. I'm not even really a student here, not in the way you understand it." She pulled out her phone, swiping to an image that made Caden's crew freeze in recognition. It showed another girl, physically identical to Shiomara, but somehow fundamentally different, broken in ways that photograph couldn't fully capture. The timestamp showed 3 years ago at a different private school, one they all recognized from similar incidents that had been covered up through family connections. "This is Serafina Delacroix," Shiomara said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "My twin sister. 3 years ago, she attended Ridgemont Prep, where a group very much like yours thought it would be entertaining to document her breakdown through increasingly cruel pranks and invasions of privacy. The library had become completely silent, except for the humming of computers and the distant sound of sirens growing closer. Every student present would later describe feeling like they were witnessing something historic, though none could articulate exactly what that something was. The photographs they took of her were distributed to every college she'd applied to, every family friend, every potential employer for the rest of her life. She tried to end her own life 4 times before finally succeeding in something else entirely, becoming someone new, someone who could never be hurt that way again. Shiomara swiped to another photo, this one showing someone who might have been Serafina but transformed beyond recognition. Short hair, different name, different gender presentation entirely. The person in the image looked confident in ways the broken girl never had, but the eyes remained haunted by trauma that no amount of reinvention could fully erase. "Lysander Chen is happy now," Shiomara continued, using masculine pronouns with careful deliberation. "He's studying neuroscience at Johns Hopkins, researching trauma recovery in assault survivors, but I never forgot the boys who broke my sister so thoroughly she had to become someone else entirely to survive." "That wasn't us," Ethan protested weakly. "We didn't even know about Ridgemont." "No," Shiomara agreed, "but you knew their ringleader. You've been exchanging tactics with him through encrypted channels for 2 years, sharing photos and videos like trading cards. His name is Maximilian Sterling, and he's currently being arrested in Boston thanks to evidence I provided to federal authorities this morning." The weight of their situation began settling on Caden's crew, like gravity suddenly tripling. This wasn't just about high school humiliation or even college admissions. They'd been caught in a web that spanned multiple states, multiple schools, potentially federal crimes that carried real prison sentences. "The Athena Collective," Dmitri breathed, his face pale with recognition. "You're part of the Athena Collective. The ones who took down that trafficking ring in Miami, who exposed the coach in Phoenix." Shiomara neither confirmed nor denied the connection, but her silence spoke volumes. The Athena Collective existed in the space between rumor and legend. A network of survivors who turned their trauma into weapons against predators who thought themselves untouchable. Some said they were backed by tech billionaires who'd experienced assault themselves. Others claimed that they had connections to intelligence agencies. Nobody knew for certain, which made them infinitely more terrifying. The library doors burst open as federal agents entered, their movements precise and professional, in ways that suggested this wasn't their first raid on an educational institution. Special Agent Sarah Chen led the team, her expression grim, as she surveyed the scene of teenagers in various states of breakdown. Caden Blackwood, Jackson Rivers, Dmitry Volkov, Ethan Nakamura, she announced, reading from a tablet that contained warrants fresh from a federal judge. You're under arrest for violations of federal laws regarding distribution of intimate images without consent, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and 37 other charges that I'll detail once you're in custody. The arrests happened quickly, but not quietly. Caden fought until agents restrained him, screaming about his rights and his father's influence that had always protected him before. Jackson went limp, seemingly grateful that someone had finally stopped him from becoming something worse. Dmitry typed frantically on his phone until agents confiscated it, trying desperately to activate some failsafe that might minimize damage. He finally understood was irreversible. Ethan just cried, the weight of his brother's confession finally breaking through years of carefully constructed justifications. As they were led away, Xiomara opened her laptop again, typing commands that began reversing some of the damage she'd inflicted. Not all of it. The crimes would stand, and consequences would follow, but she selectively restored certain things that would allow families to survive even as their sons faced justice. Why? Principal Morrison asked, standing in handcuffs as agents prepared to escort him out. Why show mercy now after destroying everything? Because destruction without purpose is just vengeance, Xiomara replied, her fingers never pausing in their work. And vengeance doesn't heal anything. This was about stopping predators and protecting future victims. The money will help survivors. The evidence will prevent future crimes. The consequences will deter others who thought themselves untouchable. The crowd of students parted as more parents arrived, some furious and demanding answers, others silent with the recognition that their children had been victims they'd failed to protect. Senator Blackwood entered like a storm system, his political power radiating from every gesture until he saw the FBI agents and understood that his influence ended where federal jurisdiction began. You'll pay for this, he told Xiomara, though the threat lacked conviction when surrounded by federal agents. I don't know who you really are, but I'll find out. I'll destroy you. Special Agent Chen stepped between them, her hand resting casually on her service weapon. Senator Blackwood, I'd strongly advise against threatening a federal witness, especially one whose cooperation is essential to cases spanning 12 states. The revelation that this investigation extended far beyond Westbrook Academy sent new waves of panic through assembled parents who suddenly wondered what other secrets might be exposed. Several quickly made phone calls to lawyers, understanding that damage control needed to start immediately. Mrs. Rivers arrived differently than the others, walking slowly like someone approaching a funeral she'd been expecting. She looked at her son in handcuffs, then at Xiomara, and did something nobody expected. She apologized. I knew, she said quietly, but her words carried through the silent library. I knew something was wrong with him, saw the signs, but I chose to believe he would grow out of it. How many girls suffered because I was too cowardly to confront my own son? The question hung unanswered because there was no acceptable number that would absolve anyone of their complicity. Xiomara studied the woman for a long moment before responding with unexpected gentility. He's 17, she said, closing her laptop and standing to face Mrs. Rivers directly. Young enough to change if he gets proper intervention instead of just punishment. Make sure he gets real therapy, not the kind that focuses on avoiding consequences, but the kind that addresses why he thought hurting others was acceptable. As evening approached and the library slowly emptied of law enforcement and traumatized families, Xiomara found herself alone with Special Agent Chen, who'd stayed behind after the official arrests were processed. "The collective is impressed," Chen said, producing credentials that suggested her connection to the group went deeper than just FBI liaison. 7 months of perfect preparation, execution that left no traces leading back to you personally, and you managed to avoid any actions that could be prosecuted. Even the photo incident was engineered to make you purely a victim. "I learned from the best," Shiomara replied, finally allowing exhaustion to show in her posture. "My mother spent 3 years teaching me digital warfare before she died. Said it would be more useful than any martial art in the modern world. She was right. The question now is what you do next. Westbrook Academy won't survive this scandal. The families involved will scatter, some to lawyers, some to therapy, some to denial. But you accomplished what you came here to do." Shiomara considered the question while packing her few belongings from the desk she'd occupied for 7 months. There are other schools, other predators, other victims waiting for someone to show them that fighting back is possible even when the system protects those who hurt them. Chen smiled slightly, producing a card with nothing but a phone number printed on expensive stock. "When you're ready for the next assignment, call this number. The collective has been watching, and we think you're ready for something bigger than high school bullies." 3 months later, Westbrook Academy existed only as a cautionary tale told in hushed whispers at other private schools. The building had been sold to developers who would turn it into luxury condos, its legacy too poisoned for any educational institution to inherit. 23 girls had come forward with stories of assault and harassment dating back a decade. Their voices finally heard, because one person had made it impossible to ignore them anymore. Caden Blackwood accepted a plea deal that included 2 years in juvenile detention and 10 years of supervised probation. His father resigned from the Senate after more connections to the network were exposed, his political career destroyed by association with crimes he'd enabled through willful blindness. Jackson Rivers received intensive therapy at a residential treatment facility, his mother visiting every week to confront the monster they'd both allowed him to become. His wrestling scholarships evaporated, but he seemed almost relieved to be free from the pressure of maintaining his aggressive facade. Dmitry Volkov faced federal charges that would keep him imprisoned until his mid-20s. His technical skills, deemed too dangerous to allow any supervised release involving computer access, his father's company survived, but barely. Its reputation forever tainted by association with systematic predation. Ethan Nakamura chose a different path, testifying against his former friends in exchange for reduced charges. His artistic talent found new expression in creating campaigns for assault prevention, though whether his reformation was genuine or calculated remained debatable. Ryan Nakamura graduated with honors and immediately began working with survivor advocacy groups, his testimony having freed dozens of victims from the silence that had protected their attackers. The livestream confession became required viewing at several law schools studying the intersection of technology and justice. Principal Morrison served 18 months in federal prison for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to conceal felonies. The investigation revealed he'd taken bribes totaling $400,000 over 6 years to minimize scandals that might affect donor relationships. But the most significant change came from the copycat actions that followed. Within 6 months, similar operations exposed predator networks at 15 other schools, all following the blueprint Shiomara had established. The Athena Collective never claimed credit officially, but their influence was unmistakable in the precision of each takedown. Shiomara herself disappeared from public view, though some claimed to spot her at different schools around the country, always in the library, always typing on an old laptop that looked harmless enough. The FBI never confirmed or denied her involvement in subsequent operations, but Agent Chen's caseload mysteriously aligned with wherever Shiomara-like figures appeared. On a rain-soaked evening in December, a new student walked into the library of Preston Preparatory Academy, an elite boarding school with whispered stories of a secret society that had operated with impunity for decades. She found a corner table, pulled out a battered laptop held together with duct tape, and began typing. The girl wore thrift store clothes and kept her head down when the school's golden boys walked past, their laughter sharp with cruel potential. They dismissed her immediately as another scholarship student who wouldn't last the semester, never noticing the small smile that played across her lips as she listened to them plan their next conquest. Her screen showed an encrypted message from someone identified only as XD that read simply, 7 months minimum, make it count. She typed back a single word, always. In the reflection of her laptop screen, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a small tattoo on her wrist, a tiny owl that might have been decorative or might have been something more. The same symbol that every Athena Collective operative wore, a reminder that wisdom came from watching, waiting, and striking when predators least expected their prey to transform into hunters. The Preston boys continued laughing, oblivious to the countdown that had already begun. Somewhere in a federal detention center, Caden Blackwood woke from nightmares about typing sounds and notification alerts, understanding finally that the most dangerous predators were the ones you never saw coming. And in a quiet apartment 3 states away, Xiomara Delacroix opened her laptop to find 17 new cases waiting for review. 17 more schools where victims needed someone to show them that justice was possible even when the system failed. She selected the next target methodically, already calculating the 7 months it would take to destroy another network of predators who thought their money and connections made them invincible. The war against systematic abuse would never truly end, but for the first time in generations, the predators had learned to feel fear. They checked over their shoulders in libraries, worried about quiet students with old laptops. They hesitated before taking photos, wondering if this might be the one that destroyed them. They questioned whether their victims were really as powerless as they appeared, because sometimes the girl you humiliated in September was engineering your complete destruction by May. Sometimes the scholarship student you dismissed as weak was documenting every crime you committed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the hunter looked exactly like prey, until the moment the trap snapped shut.